Classical Music Mysteries. March 26, 1827, 5:45 p.m. The man who left the most massive footprint in the history of music, Ludwig van Beethoven, took his final breath. The very next day, Anton Schindler and Stefan von Breuning were sorting through his room. They were busy with a specific task. They were searching for his estate, securities, and handwritten musical scores. In a corner of the messy room, they pried open a hidden drawer in his writing desk. Inside, they found a document. Along with a letter expressing love to an unknown woman, there was something else. It was an old, discolored, large sheet of writing paper. It was addressed to Beethoven's two younger brothers. When they saw the date, they gasped, October 6, 1802. That was a full 25 years before his death. Beethoven was only 31 years old at the time. The contents were absolutely shocking. It included the instruction to be read and executed after my death. Without a doubt, this document was formatted as a last will and testament. Why did he write this in his youth? But the biggest mystery was this. Over the next 25 years, Beethoven moved countless times, yet he never threw away this piece of paper detailing his resolve to die. Why did he keep it hidden away, making sure no one would ever lay eyes on it? This is the tragic yet unwavering declaration of a genius, a man forced to abandon any hope for a peaceful, happy life, and in exchange, he was reborn as a revolutionary figure in history. Chapter 1: The Hidden Loss. Let's go back a few years before this testament was written. Vienna, at the end of the 18th century. At the time, Beethoven was the darling of Viennese high society. He wore fashionable clothes and played the piano in aristocratic salons. His playing style was entirely different from the elegance of Mozart's era. It was fierce, it was wild. He played with such intensity that he would snap the piano strings. Before he was known as a composer, he reigned as an outstanding virtuoso. He utterly dominated his rivals with his brilliant improvisations. But at the very peak of his glory, a shadow was silently creeping in. Around 1798, at the age of 28, he noticed something was wrong. It didn't start with silence, it started with noise. A constant roaring in his ears, a loss of high-pitched sounds. It was tinnitus, the early stages of hearing loss. For a musician, hearing is their livelihood, but for Beethoven at that time, it meant so much more. As an improviser, his lifeline was listening to the audience's reactions and controlling the atmosphere of the room. Losing his hearing was a devastating crisis. It shook the very foundation of his life. According to historical records, he completely covered up this fact. In a letter to his friend, Dr. Franz Gerhard Wegeler, he left behind a heartbreaking cry. For 2 years now, I have avoided society. I simply cannot tell people that I am going deaf. Just imagine it. The most talked about musician in Vienna, avoiding social events so no one would realize he couldn't hear their conversations. He spent his days withdrawing into deep isolation. It is better to be misunderstood as a misanthrope than to tell the truth. This tragic resolution slowly ate away at his spirit from the inside. Medical science at the time could only offer primitive treatments. They tried electrotherapy. They tried dropping almond oil into his ears. Nothing worked, and his symptoms only grew worse. Then came the spring of 1802. His primary physician, Dr. Johann Adam Schmidt, made a suggestion. Leave the noise of Vienna behind. Rest your ears in the quiet countryside. If you do, your hearing might recover. It was a suggestion born of desperation. The medicine of the time was powerless. Rest was their only remaining hope. Grasping at straws, Beethoven headed to Heiligenstadt, a quiet village just north of Vienna. Chapter 2: A Prison of Misunderstanding. May 1802. Heiligenstadt was a beautiful resort town surrounded by vineyards and forests. Beethoven spent nearly half a year here. He loved nature. For him, this should have been a place of true peace. But ironically, this very silence forced him to face a cruel reality. In the hustle and bustle of the city, he could hide the truth. But in the quiet countryside, it became painfully clear. The distant flute of a herdsman, the singing of a shepherd, he couldn't hear them at all. An episode perfectly symbolizing his despair during this time was recorded in a later memoir. His student, Ferdinand Ries, visited Heiligenstadt to check in on his mentor. The two men were taking a walk through the woods. Ries noticed the sound of a shepherd playing a flute. He pointed it out to his teacher. Beethoven stopped and strained his ears to listen, but according to the memoir, he showed absolutely no reaction to the sound. Ries later wrote in his memoir, "He became extraordinarily quiet, and his demeanor turned terribly gloomy." This experience completely shattered any lingering hope he had for recovery. What cornered him even further was a deep sense of social isolation. To hide his deafness, he avoided contact with both villagers and friends. How did people view him, not knowing the truth? They saw him as a difficult man, a misanthrope, a stubborn fool. In the opening of the Heiligenstadt Testament, he wrote a heartbreaking protest directed at the world. "Oh, you men who think or say that I am malevolent, stubborn, or misanthropic, how greatly you wrong me. You do not know the secret cause which makes me seem that way to you." What he feared most was not just the loss of sound itself. He was terrified of being completely cut off from society while being misunderstood. He was a man with a spirit rooted in the Enlightenment. He possessed a deep love for humanity and craved connection with society. Yet, because of his illness, he was labeled a misanthrope and locked in a prison of loneliness. It was this very absurdity that may have pushed him to the brink, forcing him to seriously consider the choice of death. Chapter 3: The Rejection of Death and Its Logic. Early October, as the chill of autumn deepened, he finally took up his pen. He wrote a document addressed to his brothers. It served as a testament, confessing his agony and his final resolve. The text included mentions of his estate. It clearly showed his strong desire to avoid being misunderstood after his death. However, it was not a legally formalized will. This letter bore the dates of October 6th and October 10th, 1802. Later, it would come to be known as the Heiligenstadt Testament. Within the text, he explicitly confessed to having suicidal thoughts. A little more of this, and I would have ended my own life. This was no metaphor. For him at that time, dying as a pianist was practically synonymous with social death. But here is why this document is considered the most important material in music history. In the second half of the letter, Beethoven makes a massive shift in his logic. What stopped his urge to commit suicide? It was a singular, powerful thought that overwhelmed him. He wrote, "It was only my art that held me back. It seemed impossible to leave this world before fulfilling all the missions I felt were entrusted to me." What is truly remarkable here is how he viewed his own talent. He didn't see it as a personal possession. Instead, he viewed it objectively as a duty to be fulfilled, a mission entrusted to him by the heavens. "There is music inside me that hasn't been written yet. Until I let it all out, I cannot die." In this exact moment, his logic reversed completely. Losing his hearing may have ended his chance at a normal, happy life as a performer. If so, he would simply accept that fate. Why not live solely as an entity dedicated to the mission of art? In this document, he uses the word patience. He holds it up as his new guiding principle. This was not a passive endurance. It was an active, fierce vow to fight against adversity. Ultimately, this letter was never sent to his brothers. It was discovered among his belongings only after his death. It was not merely written in preparation for death. It was a farewell to his past self, the human Beethoven who had sought normal social interaction and happiness. And perhaps it was a ritual for him to be reborn as the artist Beethoven. Chapter 4: A Violent Answer. After returning to Vienna from Heiligenstadt, Beethoven's music began to undergo a massive transformation. The clearest example of this shift is his Symphony No. 3, Eroica. He began working on it in earnest the year after writing the Testament. Until then, symphonies had been refined by composers like Haydn and Mozart. They were expected to be harmonious, aristocratic music. Beethoven completely shattered and expanded those boundaries. First, the scale was entirely different. The performance time was around 50 minutes, nearly double the standard of the era. And the opening? There was no elegant introduction. Instead, two massive E-flat major chords are violently struck right from the start. In the development section of the first movement, dissonant chords are relentlessly repeated. The rhythm is intentionally broken. It doesn't offer the listener peace. Instead, it forces them into a state of tension and struggle. At the time of its premiere, many critics were bewildered. There was no shortage of negative reactions. They called it too long, too noisy, and complained of ear-splitting dissonances. But Beethoven did not bow to the criticism. It is said this was because he had already overcome the temptation of death in Heiligenstadt. He had made a firm resolution to live solely for the sake of art. He wasn't just trying to compose a tribute to one specific hero like Napoleon. He was writing a hymn to human greatness, to mourning, and to creation itself. You could even say that the inner turmoil he experienced during those 6 months in Heiligenstadt was sublimated into pure instrumental music. According to the memoirs of his student, Karl Czerny, Beethoven reportedly said this around this time: "I am not satisfied with the work I have done so far. From now on, I intend to take a new path." This new path broke away from traditional, formal beauty. It brought personal, inner truth into the music, even if that truth was violent and rough. This very shift heralded the dawn of the Romantic period in music. It has been pointed out that his emotional closure in the Testament likely triggered this profound musical evolution. Epilogue: A Silent Contract. In the end, Beethoven never sent this letter to anyone. If he had sent it to his brothers, it might have only bought him temporary sympathy. Or worse, he might have actually chosen death. But by keeping it close at hand, this document became his proof of survival. It functioned almost like a contract with himself to keep living. In his later life, his hearing deteriorated even further. Yet every time despair struck, he carried this rejection of death as his own internal code. "I cannot leave this world until I have brought forth everything I feel inside me," just as he wrote in his testament. The transcendent masterpieces he produced in his final years are deeply connected to this theme of overcoming suffering, established way back in 1802. The Heiligenstadt Testament. It is a record of despair and resolve, the story of one man facing death. But at the same time, it is a turning point in the history of human music. It is a testament to the moment art transformed from mere duty or entertainment into a profound expression of personal thought. At the very depths of his suffering, amidst the ringing in his ears and crushing loneliness, he found his will for music. And that will continues to violently shake our hearts today, even across 200 years of history. Thank you for watching. If you have your own thoughts, theories, or interpretations, feel free to share them in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing for more content like this. See you in the next video.